why you should learn edge highlighting, and how to get better at it. Edge highlighting is notoriously known for being one of the more difficult techniques to master in our miniature hobby. The technique was made to simulate how light would hit an object and how the edge of an object would show more light as opposed to the other side. And applying that on a miniature scale means to apply a very high contrast, thin line on the very edge of an object, which can be very, very difficult. But in this video, you'll soon learn that it's a very important tool to help you become a better miniature painter. Welcome to another installment of Hobby MoPro, the show designed to help you become more motivated and productive in your miniature hobby. My name is Louie of Louie Loves Minis, and do subscribe if you like this type of content. So why I place so much importance in the value of edge highlighting is because we are using it in a tabletop experience. And what I mean by that is when you put a miniature on the table, you don't always see the details from where you're standing. But when I see it far away and it's edge highlighted, those little tiny lines at the edge of every shape help enunciate the details of the miniature, hence making it seem more detailed even while it's from afar. So we see a lot of miniatures and paint jobs and box arts with greatly executed edge highlights. And most of the time to regular painters like us, it seems very intimidating to do. Well, this video aims to address that mere fact in 3 simple steps. So the first step is to change our mindset to edge highlighting. Most of the time I see painters substitute edge highlighting by dry brushing, and that makes a lot of sense because when you dry brush, the brush only hits the raised areas. Think of edge highlighting as a dry brush process, but very selective with even less paint. In a dry brush, we're a bit erratic and we're a bit careless in where the paint goes. And the brush size is actually bigger. But with an edge highlight, the brush size may be big, but the tip is where we're focusing the paint on. So as opposed to putting paint all over the bristles, apply paint only at the end or tip of your brush and use the edge of your brush to only dry brush certain specific edges. Once you get that mindset that this is actually a more controlled dry brush, you'll get to see that it's actually a very easy process. It's just more arduous because we're selectively doing it in smaller areas at a time. The second tip is to actually apply edge highlights in 2 layers. Now you might be thinking it's actually more steps, but if you are working on a character, if you're working on a display piece, it might be worth to add 2 layers of edge highlights. Reason being is the first layer for edge highlights is your thicker edge highlight, something that could be applied quicker and at the same time a little bit carelessly. And this thick edge highlight could be something that is a lot closer to your base tone. So if ever you do make it too thick, or if ever you make some mistakes, it may not be visible at first glance. Once you get to the second layer for highlight, the first layer acts as a mid-tone between the base color and your actual final edge highlight line. And when you look at it from afar, it makes a great transition between base into your actual edge highlight. The reason why you also want a thicker highlight before you move on to your fine edge highlight is because it also acts as your guide for your final highlight. Imagine a thicker layer of highlight over here, and you imagine using that as a guide to apply an even thinner line on top of that. And finally, the most important tip of all is to master this single movement. This pulling movement, it's always a pull movement. Normally, we are told in tutorials that edge highlighting is using the edge or the side of the brush, and we can use the dry brush, so there's an upward motion. But in most cases, we actually can't reach, or we actually can't do that, where we actually need to use the tip of the brush to make a fine line. And that's where the pulling motion comes into play. And most of the time, I find myself doing this motion. The reason is, when we edge highlight, we're normally using our round brush. So if we flick our brush upwards on the flat surface, the line becomes thicker. And when we actually use the edge of our brush on an edge, there is a chance that the line will become thick as it spreads because the bristles spread. But when you pull, we're always making sure that the tip of the brush is pulling into a line or pulling into a smaller line. So practicing this motion is very critical in the edge highlighting process. The second reason for mastering that is that there are so many lines or so many angles that we want to capture in a miniature, and when we keep doing that pulling motion, all you have to do is just repeat that pulling motion over and over again, and you get to realize you are just making one straight line over and over again. That can be your template, and all you have to do is tilt the miniature to that line. So if you notice in this video, I'm painting this Imperial Fists leather, but I'm always tilting the miniature. I am not moving my hand. My entire hand is still, and my 3 fingers are just constantly pulling. Pulling and pulling and pulling. That pulling creates a line, a straight line all the time. And maybe sometimes I would swipe up and swipe down to dry brush the edge, but in times where I can't dry brush, quote unquote, the edge, that pulling motion guarantees that straight line, and all I have to do is just keep doing that pulling motion and just change the orientation of that miniature. You can just imagine the entire edge highlighting process as drawing a straight line all the time. Pulling and pulling and pulling and pulling. And you are just slowly turning your miniature every time we need that line. What if you are edge highlighting at the curve of a miniature? Then as you pull, slowly turn your miniature around. So you are bending that line. And that's sort of how I've been edge highlighting, and I learned that process because I edge highlight almost every miniature of my army. And that pulling motion is something that stuck with me and that has guided me throughout the entire process of creating edge highlights for my army. I'll leave you guys with a bonus tip, which is really great. I actually use edge highlighting as a way to clean up my mistakes. So sometimes when we're base painting or when we're shading, we actually hit the edge of our miniature with some paint. And if you look at it, the mistake is small enough that you know you'll be able to cover it when you edge highlight. So there's no need to go over it with a base coat again. Sometimes before I get to the edge highlighting phase, I have a lot of parts of my miniatures that have dinged up parts with different base coats. They're not supposed to be there in the edge parts, but I keep telling myself I'll be covering that up with the edge highlight anyway, so that saves me more time cleaning. I hope that helps you guys with the edge highlighting. I do believe that edge highlighting is something that's really easy. It's not as intimidating as you think, and it really will be rewarding as a process when you look at your army from afar and you can really see that detail. Do try it out, do practice that pulling motion. It's a really great control as opposed to fiddling around your arm. Let me know if that helps you guys out. Well, thank you so much for watching. I'll see you next Wednesday. And as always, hobby every day to keep the screws away.